Gus in New York City, listening on WWRL. Hey, Gus, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Great conversation. I was hearing a couple of calls back the woman that saw the segment on Rachel Maddow where they brought up the LBJ tapes, and it was interesting that she was trying to compare this to the mishandling of the Iraq War intel. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to compare notes. If there really was the political will in Congress or the White House right now to prosecute the Iraq War intel, which constitutes, I believe, treason if you're lying to Congress and saying that Iraq has WMD. If there's a smoking gun that we know of, for example, in the testimony of in the book put out by CIA European Chief Tyler Drumheller, or Lawrence Wilkerson, who said he was willing to testify.
Right, he said he's talked on this show. This was Colin Powell's assistant. He's talked on this show about how they phonied up the.
Yeah, so, that was Colin Powell's chief of staff.
So your question, I didn't. First of all, let me say, Gus, I have not seen that Rachel Maddow segment. So I've been playing the LBJ tapes on this program for 3 or 4 years, however long they've been out there since the Johnson Library released them. But I don't have personal knowledge of the Rachel show other than having had a couple of callers tell me about it. So I can't speak directly to that. But what was your question?
Well, I was saying, if there was the political will to actually investigate or prosecute, and this might just be an exercise here, but what would be the closest thing to the smoking gun, as far as lying to Congress and the American people in the Iraq War intel? Because I've been studying this for years, and it seems like there's pretty good substantive evidence that show George Tenet and his chief of staff, John McLaughlin, withheld the proof that Curveball was lying.
Yeah.
The one eyewitness to WMD was lying the whole time.
Right. And I don't know what would be the smoking gun in that regard. I'm not a scholar of the Iraq War. Rachel's done a really good job of putting together a documentary based on the book Hubris that was co-authored by David Korn and who's the other guy? Yeah, Michael Isikoff. The two of them put together this book, and that documentary is, it's brilliant. And although I would take it a step farther, I would say this is treason. But I think it's fairly clear and fairly implicit in that. But all of that said, I go back to 1999. When George W. Bush was not even yet running for president, but was planning on running for president. And his mother and dad hired an old family friend, a fellow by the name of Mickey Herskowitz, who was a well-known author and a good ghostwriter. There are people who just make a living being ghostwriters, writing other people's biographies and autobiographies. And they had hired him to write A Charge to Keep, which was George W. Bush's autobiography, because you have to have an autobiography out if you're going to run for president, right? Obama did, Dreams of My Father and all this kind of stuff. And so he wrote the first draft of A Charge to Keep. It wasn't suck up enough, for George W. Bush, for his dad, and in his dad's opinion, so they hired somebody else to finish it. But he had about 100 hours of taped interviews with George W. Bush, and he spoke on the record with journalist Robert Perry and said, well, here, this is Cindy Sheehan testifying before John Conyers and before Congress. Keep in mind, this is a year before George W. Bush is even running for president. Here's what he had to say to the guy who was writing his biography for him.
As a matter of fact, in interviews in 1999 with respected journalists and longtime Bush family friend Mickey Herskowitz, then Governor George Bush stated, "One of the keys to being seen as a great leader is to be seen as commander-in-chief. My father had all this political capital built up when he drove the Iraqis out of Kuwait, and he wasted it. If I have a chance to invade, if I had that much capital, I'm not going to waste it. I'm going to get everything passed that I want to get passed, and I'm going to have a successful presidency," end quote.
And you'll recall when George Bush won his second term, the first thing he did was he said, I've got all this political capital and I'm going to spend it. And what he was going to spend it on was what he ran for Congress on back in 1977 in Texas and lost. and that was privatizing Social Security. So I think that's the original sin, Gus, is that this guy, his Commerce Secretary, whose name escapes me at the moment, but he wrote a book, just 2-3 years into the Bush administration, saying that the very first cabinet meeting that they had, which was 2 or 3 days after George was sworn in, George, just out of the clear blue sky, first item of business was, how do we attack Saddam Hussein? How do we invade Iraq? And everybody was like, why would you want to do that? What are you talking about? And he had this thing. He wanted to be a war president, and he thought if he could be a war president, he would get so much political capital from that, like James Madison talked about. This is one of the flaws in our form of government, is that the commander-in-chief is the president, and if he exercises that power of commander-in-chief, he gets all these additional powers and emoluments was the word that the phrase that Madison used, and Madison warned us about it. Bush did it. That would be the point that I would start with. Gus, thanks for the call.